our first item for today would be launching the GANA podcast, which is exciting and brilliant project that we are really looking forward into. It's all about bringing these nurses from together to learn from each other. So the podcast name is Gems from the Flow. You might have heard it before just a while ago. And I really would like to welcome Lynn Day, to introduce more about the podcast.
Thank you, Sashini. This is a wonderful thing that we can do as an association for aged care nurses, and that's to provide some peer-to-peer learnings and narratives, which we'll talk about later. So the podcast idea is about Gems from the Floor, and that's about learning from each other. It's stories by nurses, for nurses, with some expert interventions. So I think listening to Victoria talk about Crystal's painting that she has done for GANA and the ripple effect of gerontological nursing, I think that's a really nice idea for the podcast, because that's the aim, that we have nurses who are working on the floor who are able to speak through an audio podcast, not a video, but an audio podcast, to explain, to talk about some stories that they've had, some cases that they've had, and to discuss that peer-to-peer with a little bit of expert advice. Now, I'm just going to read a little bit here because I've written some things down and I'm not good at remembering it all. So it aims to bring gerontological nurses together across our settings, not just aged care, but community aged care and acute aged care. So it's to umbrella all of our aged care nurses clinically, so that we're all on the same page about clinical issues, because we know a lot of nurses, especially in residential aged care and also in community aged care, are very clinically isolated and often have to make clinical decisions in isolation. The podcast series is aiming to bridge that gap with a little bit of information and, you know, down the track, hopefully some sort of joining of people's experiences. So we're hopefully learning through narratives and case studies with some expert and academic summary and some key learning points. So there will be some summary of learning for us. So each audio podcast is structured around clinical cases by aiming to focus on a clinical narrative by nurses, for nurses, accompanied by expert learnings prompted by a nurse's narrative. And also, I'm hoping that we can also add on to the narratives any academic evidence and research that links to the clinical case that we talk about. Clinical narratives, I did a bit of research about clinical narratives and couldn't find much where narratives are by nurses, for nurses. We're familiar with clinical narratives when we're practicing patient-centered care because we use it every day in aged care to learn about our residents, clients and patients. We know that obtaining a patient-based story of their life's lessons, achievements and goals can help us enormously in providing patient-centered care. During our nursing studies, we're also familiar with reflective stories, how we perceived a clinical situation went, how we could have done things differently and what we could have learnt. And if we're fortunate, we may also have a mentor who can help us to reflect and guide us on our journey of lifelong learning in the wonderful, complex and challenging work of gerontological nursing. So the podcast is going to work by being recorded. Now, in the early stages, I got a fluffy microphone and I recorded Karen, who you'll hear in a little excerpt today. She was very generous with her time. But I can also record via phone from a distance, and it records quite well, and then I edit the audio. So recording is audio only, it's not visual, so it's not, you're not going to be seen on the screen unless you want to. I can also record over Zoom, and it probably is about a 10-minute case reflection. Then I will find an expert in that area who will also provide some additional points, and hopefully we can find an academic who can add some evidence base. So it's a clinical learning. So in order to grow our podcast library, which we only just started and we've got a few podcasts up on our website, we need nurses. We need clinical nurse educators. We need gerontological nurse academics to put their hands up for these Gems from the Floor podcasts. And so we hope eventually that the podcast will be able to count towards CPD for nurses. We're in the early stages and we hope to grow this. So we will be talking later about asking you to put your name down to be interviewed for this, because what I found is that nurses are reluctant to speak about their clinical cases in a recorded environment, and that's why we've asked a few people on today to talk about that. And I think Sachini will introduce those people, and especially Susan, who's done some research in that area of nursing and storytelling. There's not much information or research out there, and Susan has done this. So how can we get people to come and talk and to learn from each other? So that's a podcast in a nutshell. We've done a few. It's been wonderful, but we need more people, and we want to grow this to umbrella all our gerontological nurses and join them together clinically. Karen was a wonderful interviewee, and we've got an excerpt now of a little bit of her podcast, which is up, and she'll then talk later about that experience.
Certainly, you can't do it until you're doing it. Like in real life, doing that and watching it happen. If we put that forward, you've maybe prevented somebody getting aspiration pneumonia, being on antibiotics and getting a secondary infection. You've enlightened a care worker to go, oh, there are little nuances here that I need to report. Hopefully she realises how important her role is. It's not just the spoon in the mouth. That role deserves a whole lot of respect.
Thank you, Michael. So that's just a little excerpt of one of our podcasts. As I say, they last about 20 minutes. And we need to, I don't know if Rhonda is here today, but Rhonda was one of our experts who also contributed to a couple of our podcasts. So thank you for that, and thank you, Karen. So that's the podcast idea in a nutshell. It's in its early stages, and we need you to provide that ripple effect. So we'll be asking you to put names down later, and a prize that might be in the offing. Thanks, Sachini.
Thank you very much, Lynn.